What's going on, guys, and welcome back to this week's Bourbon of the Week. Today we have a new one for you. This is Basil Hayden Toast. Now, you know me and my relationship with Basil Hayden. Loved it at first when I first got started into bourbon. It was one of the first bourbons that I started recommending when I started drinking bourbon. So this was what I was introduced upon when I drank bourbon for the first time. Not the toast, obviously, just the original Basil Hayden, which we're out of. And by the way, so we're going to compare this a little bit to the 10-year, just because there are a few differences with this current Basil Hayden Toast over their original mash bill. The 10-year compared to the original isn't too much different. We just did a 10-year comparison. So we're going to compare the 10-year to the Basil Hayden Toast. We're only going to rank the toast today, not the 10-year. But everybody knows before we get started on all of that, time for the traditional sip. Seems different. So here we have it, Basil Hayden Toast. Now, as you can probably already tell, they still have this cool little buckle thing on there. I do enjoy this little buckle, but they did get rid of this paper. So as you can see, this is what they used to have on here. This is the original. By the way, Basil Hayden's, not anymore. This is officially called Basil Hayden. No apostrophe S. Same thing with this 10-year that I have. Basil Hayden's, they're getting rid of that. They're changing it up. Now, this is supposed to be a permanent bourbon in their collection here, so it's not going to be a limited release or anything like that. And the interesting thing about this is the mash bill is completely different. They're getting away from the high rye mash bill when it comes to this toast here. Obviously, if you don't know what toast is, they're using toasted barrels after the charred barrel process. We're going to go over that a little bit more in the Bourbon Bomb of the Week. If you want to learn about that, make sure you stick around. By the way, before we get started, make sure you click that subscribe button. We're in a competition here with Straight Up Bourbon to see who can get to 1,000 first, and we only have like 80 to go at this point right now. When I put this video out, I hope it's less than that, or maybe we're already there. Congratulations to me. Either way, let's get back to this. Basil Hayden, not Basil Hayden's, toasted barrel instead of just the original char, and this is coming in with brown rice instead of the high rye mash bill that we're used to from Jim Beam. So Jim Beam and their Basil Hayden's is usually a high rye mash bill. I think this is an undisclosed mash bill. I don't know if they just replaced the rye with the rice and they didn't mess with anything else. I didn't really look into it that much. I just bought this bottle today. But it is brown rice instead of the rye as the secondary grain. So I'll be interested to see between that and the toast if this changes the whole dynamic on Basil Hayden's. Now, like I mentioned, Basil Hayden, I'm going to have to get used to that. Now, as I mentioned before, I have a love-hate relationship with Basil. So I started out loving Basil. Nice, easy sipper, 80 proof. You can always find it. At $40, when I started to revisit it and started to open up other bottles in my collection at that $40 price range, I realized maybe this isn't the best bourbon that I actually enjoy. Maybe it was just a great sipper. Maybe it's a great introduction bourbon, and I still might believe that because I still do put Basil Hayden's, the original, as my like introductory bourbon. If you're looking to get into bourbon, it's definitely a good place to start. It's easy sipping, it's smooth, it's got the Jim Beam name behind it, but at $40 I can understand now why I wouldn't want to buy that bottle. Then we got into the 10-year over here, and it was absolutely terrible. I wouldn't recommend getting the 10-year because it's just a waste of money compared to the original Basil Hayden. It's the same product with a 10-year age. Maybe you get some more oak, but that's about it. This one, though, is changing the game. They're changing the mash bill. Still 80 proof, by the way, Jim Beam. I don't know what you're doing. You got Knob Creek coming out here with all these different proofs, 100 proof, 120 proof, store picks galore, but yet this Basil Hayden still seems to just sit at 80 proof, and I don't know why they want to do that. But at 80 proof, toasted barrel, different mash bill, non-age stated still, which another thing I just don't love by Jim Beam. Jim Beam has such great products that I don't know why they keep Basil the same. I guess they're not keeping it. They're changing it up. New look, new mash bill, all kinds of stuff. Now, this isn't the first time that they messed around with this brown rice. They did it with their little book, chapter 4, I believe. They messed around with brown rice instead of rye. I forget. They had another bottle, I think. It was like brown rice bourbon or something like that, where they mess around with brown rice. So it's not their first time. This is a, which No did this? I think this is a Fred No product. Am I making that up? Doesn't say it on here. This is one of the No's is in charge of this product here. So he's changing things up. He's trying things out. He's trying new things, which is all great. But does that translate? Is this now a better bourbon because of it? We're about to find out. Let's get into drinkability on this first. So the tough thing about this, I'm stepping on. I got bourbon bottle stuff everywhere. The tough thing about this at 80 proof, you shouldn't feel any burn on this, and it's kind of weird because you get rid of that high rye mash bill. Let's try the 10-year here. You get rid of that high rye mash bill, and you should feel like, I don't think brown rice should offer any type of spice to this, right? Not as much as like a rye would. You would expect this to sip easier than the 10-year, and it doesn't. The 10-year is substantially smoother. This has a little bit of an ethanol kick for an 80 proof that it shouldn't have. I mean, it's slight. Don't get me wrong. It's nothing crazy, but it's there. I definitely get it, and that's disappointing because, again, I would want Jim Beam to do something with this to offer it at a higher proof, especially if they're going to do the toasted barrel thing. Seems like a gimmick. It seems like they're kind of late to the game on the toasted barrel. We have the Elijah Craig toasted barrel. Barrel proof, toasted barrel. So we have Elijah Craig toasted barrel. We don't like Elijah Craig in this house. It's not my favorite. I don't know why people love it. It is what it is. I guess it's a good price range and everything like that. But that's been out for a while now. So toasted barrel isn't new. There's a bunch of bottles that have put toasted barrels out. So Basil Hayden looks like they're just trying to jump on the gimmick train here. Basil Hayden. Did I say that? I think I keep saying Hayden's. They just seem like they're jumping on the gimmick train. Let's put out a toasted bottle. Let's change up the recipe. Let's change up the look and make people buy it. I mean, it worked. I bought it. But this has an ethanol kick and at 80 proof. That's quite disappointing. We're going to give this a pretty terrible score when it comes to the drinkability on this because it's such a low proof. If this was a 100 proof and it drank like 105, all right, that's different. If this is an 80 proof and it's brown rice, there's no rye in this, this should have literally zero ethanol kick, especially with my alcohol tolerance at this point, where I'm drinking 114 proof every night. This should taste like water to me, and it doesn't. 6.2, and I'm disappointed. So next up, we're going to get into taste on this, and the taste on this is weird to me. So I've never had anything that's had brown rice as its secondary grain, but the nose on this almost, so I actually had to look this word up. I look up a lot of reviews. I watch a lot of other people's reviews, not on this particular bottle I haven't, but in general, and you hear this word tannic or tannin or tannic. I think it's tannic, T-A-N-N-I-C. And I look this word up and I try and figure out like what is tannic? What does it taste like? Because people are like, oh, it's got a very tannic taste to it. And I almost think that this is what they're talking about. So you look up the word, the definition, and this seems to be like a tannic taste. And you know what it is that I think I'm comparing them to? And please correct me if I'm wrong on this. It tastes like black licorice or maybe just licorice in general. I haven't had it in a really long time. But I get this same taste profile from like pot stills all the time, where it tastes like something's just funky, it's a little off, it's not great, and it's not my favorite flavor profile. You get a little bit of, you get Jim Beam, by the way, you get the nuttiness in this still. You don't get any rye spice with this, although it is hot, the ethanol kicks there. You get this oaky, this tannic oaky flavor that is just off-putting almost. It doesn't really merge well together. So the one thing that I thought Jim Beam would be able to do this is the blending process, putting together a great blended tasted bourbon. But this just, it kind of seems all over the place. It starts out sweet, you get right into a little bit of spice, but it's not like a rye spice, it's like a cinnamon spice, and then you almost move right into this oaky, tannic, licorice flavor profile. It's just meh. And at 80 proof, again, they're not punching you in their face. They're not delicious. They're not bold. They're not right there. You're like looking for them. You're like, what is this? What does this taste? What does that taste? And that's really it. I thought the toast would maybe bring out a little bit more vanilla. Usually the toasted barrel is what brings out all of those sweet flavors, those sweet aromas and everything like that. But you don't get that. You get a little bit of sweetness at the front, but nothing, I mean, even compared to the 10-year, which I hated, seems watered down too. But at the same time, there's at least something there, right? You can pick something up. The rye's there. You can get a little bit of flavor from the rye. You get a little bit of oak. You get a little bit of vanilla. But on this one, I don't know what brown rice tastes like when it's finally put into a glass, but this just isn't it. Just not good. Dry, by the way. Very dry compared to the 10-year. This dry, tannic oak licorice flavor. Not good. Not what I want in a bourbon. And when we get into price on this, not what you're looking for $50. But let's stick strictly to taste on this. I'm going to give this like a, I hate to do this to you, Basil. I'm going to give this like a 5.0 when it comes to taste. I don't want to hate it. It's just not good. I don't know if they rushed this or what, but. And last but certainly not least, we're going to have to pour a little bit more of this. We're going to get into taste. We just did taste. We're going to get into price on this. $50. $50. Okay? I got pissed off knowing I had to spend $40 on Basil Hayden just so I could have a backup bottle. This will be the last bottle I probably buy. I do like to recommend this still to new bourbon drinkers because it gives you a little bit of a flavor profile, but I'll probably pick a different one than this toasted. I can promise you that. Or toast. It's not even toasted. Basil Hayden toast. Label looks cool. $50 is an extremely difficult ask for anything at 80 proof. Now, again, we talk all the time. Proof doesn't always translate to good. It doesn't have to be 110 proof to be good. But when you're talking about the value of the bourbon inside it, what is adding to the value of this? So age would add to the value of this. Well, guess what? We don't know the age of this. Mash bill would add to the value of this. If it's a rye, if a high rye costs more than wheat. That's why that's why Weller is so popular with the wheat, because they can keep it cheap, because wheat is a cheap grain compared to rye. Now this is brown rice. I buy a lot of brown rice. We eat a lot of brown rice in this house. It's not expensive, at least as far as the brown rice that we're buying. I don't know if it's literally the exact same stuff that you cook for dinner, but I don't think it would be more expensive than rye. Don't quote me on that. But so we're not getting it in the mash bill. We're not getting it in the age that we know of. The toasted barrels obviously are going to be a second barrel, a second aging process. They say up to months in a toasted barrel, so I guess it doesn't hit that year mark. So a couple of months extra aging and the extra barrel. Sure, that's going to add a little bit of a cost to it. Basil Hayden already is overpriced at $40 for their original. So to put this at $50 means that they're just basically charging you for that extra couple of months in that toasted barrel. So to already be overpriced and then to overprice it again is just not fair to the consumer, especially when you're putting out a product that's 80 proof, not age stated, and doesn't taste good. There's no value in this to me. I picked this up. I put this on my Instagram post. I put a picture up and I said, should I buy this bottle? 20 or 30 people reached out to me and they said, don't waste your money. Don't waste your time. It's not good. It's Basil Hayden. I said, did you try it? They said, no, but we already know. It's Basil Hayden's. I was on a live stream the other day with Mash and Drum. I wasn't on with him. God, I wish I was on with him. I was watching a live stream of the Mash and Drum, Jason, and they started talking about it. He brought this up, and everybody in the chat, don't worry, it's going to be terrible. Typical Basil Hayden's, typical Jim Beam. It's going to be bad. It's going to be bad. So I kind of didn't want to go into this with a closed mind about it. I wanted to have an open mind about this, but it's bad. It's not good. It's not good tasting. It's not good drinkability. It's worse drinkability than their original stuff, and they aged it longer. So I don't know what they're doing here. Price on this, $50, awful ask. I'm going to give it like a 4.1 when it comes to price. So listen, while I add these scores up, let's send it over to this week's Bourbon Bomb of the Week. We're going to keep it short, but let's talk about toasted barrels versus charred barrels. Let's do this. So for this week's Bourbon Bomb of the Week, we're going to talk about toasted versus char. So we have the Elijah Craig toasted barrel, the Basil Hayden's toast here, versus a charred barrel. Now to be considered a bourbon, it has to go into a New American charred oak, specified as container, but for this video we'll just say barrel. So it has to go into a New American charred oak barrel. Now to be charred, basically they have level 1 through level 5 char. I believe level 4 is the most commonly used, but they put a high intense heat into the barrel, and what that does is it adds a char to the inside of the barrel. It will turn it black, just like this and just like this. And what that does is, one, it gets rid of any type of properties inside the barrel that might contaminate your bourbon, and two, it's going to open up those pores and give you a flavor profile from the sweetness of the wood, the sweetness of the char, and everything like that. Now to toast it, basically they turn this heat way down. Instead of being a high intense flame for 15 or 20 seconds, they turn the heat down, they turn the time up, and they just toast the barrel, and that's exactly what it is. Now, no bourbon can start in a toasted barrel because, again, like I said, once it's poured out, it's got to go into a New American charred oak barrel. But afterwards, most companies will put it into another barrel that is toasted. That's what these two do here. Some companies will toast the barrel first and then char it and basically give it two different layers of charring. And while that is a different process, most companies are doing it the way that these two are doing it right here and putting it into a second barrel, aging it for a little bit longer. How long? We don't really know on this one here, but that's the difference between charred and oak and toasted oak when it comes to these barrels. What does it do exactly? I'm sure somebody knows a little bit more than me about the actual chemical and physical process that happens to these when you put it into a charred versus a toasted barrel, but I'm not the scientific type. So that's all we got for you on today's Bourbon Bomb of the Week. Cheers. So that's a little bit about the charred versus toasted process. Again, we can get more in depth into it, and maybe we'll bring somebody on that knows a little bit more about the scientific side of things and how that actually affects the process of the bourbon. But in the meantime, this here scored a 5.1, and quite frankly, I think that's where it deserves to be. It's not a good taste. The drinkability for an 80 proof is absolutely awful. It does have an ethanol kick. It's not overwhelming, but at the same time, when you're talking about an 80 proof bourbon, there shouldn't be anything there, especially considering this is not the high rye mash bill that they're used to working with. The new label is cool, the name changes, whatever, but this is still typical Basil Hayden's overpriced, overdone, toasted, trying to gimmick something out of some money, and I got caught up in it, and I bought the bottle. I called my brother-in-law this morning when I went to buy this bottle. I said, do you want one? And he's like, yeah, grab me one. And then I kind of talked him out of it. I said, why don't I get one? We'll see how it is together. And I'm kind of glad I talked him out of wasting $50 on a bottle of bourbon like this. This bottle will sit like this. I will let people come over. I will let them try that. I will send out handshakes if you want to. If you don't want one of these, let me know. I will send you a handshake of this. You can try it without having to waste your $50. I promise you that. In the meantime, make sure you check me out on Instagram at Bourbon of the Week. Every Tuesday at 4 p.m. we drop an image of the bourbon that we're going to review. You can try and go on and guess the score that I'm going to give it. If you guess the closest, I'll give you a shout out on the channel as well as enter you in a monthly drawing for some cool prizes, including custom Glencairns. Make sure you join me on Discord so you can talk about bourbon all day with me. I'll put that link in the description below. And if you want to support on Patreon, I got a baby girl on the way, so I can't afford to be wasting my money on $50 bourbons like this. Thank you, Jim Beam. I just lost out on diapers for my baby because of your crappy bourbon. But that's going to be it for today. Make sure you click that subscribe button. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. We are on the road to 1,000 and we're getting damn close. In the meantime, though, stay healthy, stay happy, and stay drinking. Just not this. Cheers.